Secession has been a big topic of discussion over the last week here on Free Talk Live and also internationally. Searches for Scotland were very big on Google Trends last week. Secession, I'm not sure where that search was, but certainly a lot of people were interested in what was happening over in Scotland. We covered that story in great detail here on Free Talk Live, and ultimately it didn't end up panning out, unfortunately, but some people are saying that it might have had something to do with voter fraud, not necessarily on the part of the voters, but on the part of the people counting the votes, perhaps. There's a story over at Infowars.com where the head of Russia's election observation body has accused the British government in Westminster of rigging the Scottish independence vote.
Uh-oh.
Asserting there were more yes
There's
votes
a conspiracy theory afoot
than no votes, despite the No campaign claiming victory. Following a political battle that captured global attention, the Better Together campaign beat off their pro-independence adversaries in securing a 55 to 45% success after yesterday's voting, meaning that Scotland stays a part of the United Kingdom. However, in a move undoubtedly tied to Moscow's increasing hostilities with the British government, which vehemently backed the No campaign, the head of one of the country's top election observer groups controversially claimed today that the vote was fixed. Speaking to RIA Novosti, George Fyodorov, the head of the Kremlin-aligned Association for the Protection of Electoral Rights, stated that, quote, according to what our observers at the polling offices tell us, there were more yes votes during the vote count. He went further, remarking, Scotland found itself under immense pressure. Those on the UK side campaigning for a no vote resorted to every violation imaginable. And this wasn't the only individual who suggested that there were some shifty things going on at the vote counting situations.
More than one person has alleged a conspiracy theory.
His sentiments were echoed by Igor Morozov, a member of the Council of the Federation Committee for Foreign Affairs, although Morozov stopped short of claiming the entire referendum was rigged. Quote, we can see that with the exception of Glasgow, those supporting independence failed to register a majority. I think that Westminster propaganda played a great part in that. I suppose it's down to information put out in recent weeks from the party leaders. Thanks to that, the Scots arrived at the results that they have. Fyodorov did not specify precisely what violations occurred, although as reported earlier, some yes supporters have drawn attention to sporadic examples which appear to show yes votes being miscounted and added to the no tally, although such allegations remain unproven. Now, it wouldn't be a surprise to find out that the people in charge of the system have an interest in keeping that system together and therefore engaged in some sort of fraudulent activities.
The three major parties in Scotland backed this election and wanted to have this election. Now, so therefore, what we're alleging here is that they wanted to have the election and wanted to bring the election about so that they could then scuttle it. I'm getting more skeptical of this. I don't know, but I mean, like we're going to have to go a little further than some people saying,
Well, okay, and I have to tell you, I didn't look at there was a video that someone had posted to Facebook today also alleging that they had evidence of the voter fraud. I didn't take the time to look at that.
Oh, I believe that there's probably some of the elections weren't handled properly, like ballots weren't handled properly, because that happens all the time.
Right. Yeah, we see evidence of voter fraud here in the United States. We've seen that
the fact that ballots aren't handled properly doesn't mean that there is fraud. Fraud, like handling the ballots properly is one thing. Fraud is a different thing. Mm-hmm. You can accidentally not tape the ballot box shut properly, but if you count it and it's still legit, it's still legit. You know what I mean?
There was a lot of things about this election that made me go, Like, one of the things was the Westminster politicians promising a day before the election that the Scotland politicians could have power over taxation and healthcare and a couple other important things. They were like, oh, baby, don't leave.
Yeah.
We'll give you everything you want.
In fact, when we were looking on Friday, we had a breakdown of like an exit poll of folks in Scotland and, who voted for what. That was where we found out that young people, very young people, 16 and 17-year-olds voting, 70-something% of them voted to leave.
Yeah.
So it was in that breakdown.
Just so happens a bunch of the old people are on the dole.
Mm-hmm, exactly. And so what happened in the breakdown was the reasons were there was like a question about, well, what were the reasons why you decided to vote no? What were the reasons why you decided to vote yes? That kind of thing. And in the list of reasons as to why people voted no, that is to stay with the United Kingdom, one of them, about 25% of those respondents, their answer was that, well, we were under the impression that we would go ahead and get more independence anyway if we stayed in the Union. Is basically what you were saying there, and that was one of the promises made, even though nothing was ever, written down in stone or anything like that.
We're a bunch of suckers who believe an abuser, and we'll stay with any abusive relationship if they promise to act better next time.
Would you like independence, Scotland, or will you take the mystery gift behind door number 2? I mean, it's fascinating. Yeah. But yes, I truly do believe that's what happened. I don't know about these allegations of fraud. Maybe they're true, maybe they're not, but this is really the difficulty with the democratic process from the get-go is the loser tends to say one of two things. Well, often they say the right thing, which is, well, we've lost this time. We'll try to bring this back up when it's relevant again and do it all again. But often they'll say recount or they'll say fraud. And, I'm sick of hearing those things. Tell you what, if you couldn't handle fraud from the get-go, you folks that allege fraud every time, then maybe you deserve to lose. Maybe you've got a system that you're allied against. The fact is, if they are counting your votes and they have been counting your votes for decades and you haven't done anything about it,
too little,
you
too late.
deserve what you get. And I don't know what to do. Like, I don't know. You're talking about people that rule by force. And the only way to get out from under people that rule by force historically has been force. And I don't think that that's a good solution. But I mean, you're going to have to bring this up. Political solutions take time to implement. It's not the first election generally, anytime. And
that's true. That's true. And
maybe
maybe
you got to
they'll
bring
get
these
it next
things
time.
out.
And I don't know how long it's going to be before we see this question again. I don't know if there's like a minimum amount of time before it can come back or if it can just come back next year or in a couple of years in Scotland. But I hope they keep bringing this thing back so they can build some momentum and then, maybe swing things in the right direction. But, there's plenty of examples of fraudulent things going on with elections in the United States. It's not a stretch to believe that the people in power would want to protect that power and are willing to break all kinds of laws and rules in order to do that. I mean, certainly we've seen with the electronic voting systems in the U.S. that they're easily manipulable, back doors were programmed into them, they're hackable. So, we know there's problems there, and certainly there have been evidence of miscounted votes that have been mistreated in that, I think it was in New Hampshire a while back where you mentioned, Mark, somebody didn't seal a box correctly. Yeah. There was something like that happened here where, there's like some sort of official tape that's supposed to be put on the boxes of the ballots, and then the ballots are supposed to be shipped to a certain location where the tape is supposed to be removed, but it had been tampered with, and nobody knows who did the tampering, and, so who knows what's going on with that stuff. But it seems very shifty to me. And ultimately, if we want to be free, voting probably isn't going to bring us that freedom. If the 45% of people in Scotland who voted for freedom, or voted at least for independence, not necessarily for freedom, but voted for independence, if they just decided to declare their independence and say, well, we're just not going to send money to the UK anymore, we're independent now, then that would be all that would be needed, would be some, courage. More coming up here. This is Free Talk Live. We're talking about secession. Who's next? Scotland didn't pull it off. It was close, 55 to 45.
They just want you to believe it was close.
55% voting to stay with the United Kingdom, the remainder voting to leave, with younger people under the age of 55, being more likely to vote to leave rather than stay. People over the age of 55 voting majority, an a firm majority, and in fact over 65, a solid, almost a supermajority voting to stay. So elderly folks far more likely to stick with the status quo. We've got Tommy on the line in Glasgow. via Skype. Tommy, welcome back to Free Talk Live. You had called in just before the vote in Scotland last week to kind of give us the scoop of what things were like there on the ground. And now it's been a few days, so it's good to hear back from you. What's the latest?
Yeah, they may take our lives and they've took our votes, but they'll never take our Free Talk Live.
Thanks, Tommy.
Listen, yeah, a bit deflated. It's took me a few days to get my head around it. All sorts of shenanigans and untoward things have happened. And many positives have been taken out of it. Although the vote was lost for the people on the good side on the referendum, people who wanted Scotland to have more control of its own destiny. Mm-hmm. Sadly, we lost the votes, but as it's becoming more apparent, not only did they lie, connive, cheat and bribe and put fear into the entire population, the vote has now been marred by serious accusations of vote rigging. There's videos of someone who was meant to be an adjudicator running the vote, filling out blank ballot papers. There's also cases where on TV,
filling them out with no votes.
Filling them out with a no vote and folding it and seeing them, looking about to make sure nobody was seeing them and filling it in. And on Sky, on the main news channel, there was piles of votes in the no, and clearly on two of them at the top, there were yes votes. There was also 600,000 postal votes that came in, and the high proportion of them went to the no side. And then there's also the fact that in Dundee, which was known as the yes city, which was expecting about
hold on. Before you go on with the Dundee thing, what are you suggesting was with the postal votes? So like here in the U.S., there's what they call absentee voting, where you can vote by mail if you can't physically show up to the polls. Is that what you mean when you say postal votes?
Postal, indeed. And so what I'm saying is the percentage on the postal votes was significantly higher on the no side than what was happening for people going up to the place to vote. Now that may be explain the fact that a lot of old age pensioners, old people who couldn't vote, they were tending to stick with no or wanting to vote no. Mm-hmm. But then the problem with Dundee, what happened, the fire alarm went off 3 times, and both the city where I sit just now, Glasgow, Dundee, and just 2 other places, North Lanarkshire and West Dunbartonshire, they are the only 4 councils out of 32 that registered yes votes. All the rest of them registered no votes. And in the 2 cities, Glasgow is the biggest city, Edinburgh is the next, even though it's the capital, mm-hmm. and then it would be Aberdeen and Dundee. Now, Glasgow and Dundee's votes, the percentage of the people voting was 75% in both of them, and there was other places where the no votes was registered where they were getting 85 to 91% of the turnout. And so people are suggesting that the vote for Glasgow was slowed down somewhat in Dundee because they were going to be yes, and the vote was increased in some of these other areas. But that's beside the point. That is not really beside the point, because that is very clear of electoral fraud that could have happened. And so our votes, the people who voted yes, many of them could not have been counted properly. So we should be demanding for a re-vote. But the people who organised it, well, I'm talking about on the no side, the campaign, as I say, this was one of fear and putting the fear of God into everybody. There was even politicians turning round to old people and saying we might not be able to pay your pension. This was seriously brutal stuff. I mean, this was sick.
Which may explain one reason why older folks over the age of 65, over 70% of them in Scotland voted to stay in the Union. They were afraid of losing their benefits.
Hey, Tommy.
And this is another thing. Can I just finish this one? Sorry.
Yeah.
How did they know? It's supposed to be a secret ballot. Well, I looked at the back, and this is only the first time in my life the second time. The first time was to make a spoiled ballot paper, but this is only the first time I've registered a proper vote. And when you look at the back, there was a serial barcode and there was numbers. And they say this is supposed to be a secret vote, but now what they've come out and they're able to tell percentages and figures of what people voted in each area of the percentages. So how is this a secret ballot? There's serious things that was on here, and I'm glad that you've given me the chance to highlight this to the rest of the world, to say that there's been serious rigging of the vote. There's serious irregularities that have happened here, and there's seriously people of the state, MI5, MI6, the government spooks who have engineered something terrible here, because the people of Scotland genuinely want, yes, I was taking my old campaign, I must have contacted maybe 2,000, 3,000 people in just about 2 months of campaigning myself.
Yeah, you
And
said
the
you were just calling
overwhelming-
names in the phone book. Now, Derek J had a question for you, Tommy.
Sorry. On you
Yeah.
go, Derek. On you go.
Yeah, I'm for independence, and I understand you believe something untoward is going on with the vote for Scottish independence, but just to play devil's advocate here, have you no compassion or empathy for the elderly who rely on Westminster for survival?
Yes, well, I mean, my mother, of course, my mother's 68 and her sister 70-odd. And so there was a lot of, yes, people on the elderly side as well that could see through the lies. I mean, now my mum is no longer buying a paper that she bought for all her life. It was supposed to be a Labour paper, the Daily Record. Now she's no longer voting Labour, and this is the party that generations of Scots, that if you'd put a monkey in a Labour rosette, they would get voted in. That's how much the people would just vote Labour. So my mum's no longer voting Labour, and she even asked me, right, because I've never paid my BBC licence. This is the main broadcaster where everybody has to pay their licence fee, and if you don't pay it, you can end up in court and even end up in jail. Now, my mum,
Just to be clear what you're saying there, just for listeners that don't know what you're saying, the BBC license, you have to have a license to have a television in the UK.
They want you to pay it whether you have a television or not.
Really?
Yes.
Yeah.
If you're
got a
found
phone,
to
if
be
you've got a
watching
phone.
television without a license, it's an offense, correct?
Yeah, and you can be given a fine, and if you don't
Prosecuted.
pay it, and then
Yep.
you can possibly put in
Go
jail.
to jail.
Yeah, and my mum turned round for the first time, says, "Son, how do you go about doing this? What will happen?" I says, "Look, just don't answer the door, and if they come, just say you're not the householder. Cheerio, close the door, and be done with it." I mean, there's nothing they can really do. I mean, and it's a protest that people should be doing. And there's
Yeah, I imagine
this
that's a lot
movement-
like. I imagine that it's a lot like here, where the people that are getting caught for that are probably allowing the police to come in and allowing them to check the TV or check, compare their notes or whatever. Now, did you have more for Tommy?
Yeah, I have
Jacobs?
more questions
Okay,
about
hang on.
independence.
Tommy, hang on, because I also want to know: can this come around again, and how soon? Are we going to see this back in another year, 5 years, 10 years? How long is it going to take to get this referendum back on the ballot for round 2? 855-450-FREE. If you've got a question for Tommy in Glasgow, you are certainly welcome to call in as well. This is Free Talk Live. You take control. Let's bring Tommy back on the line here in Glasgow via Skype.
Thanks, guys.
Tommy, thanks for coming back on. I know Derek had at least a few more questions, maybe one or two. I'm not sure how many more. Go ahead, Derek J. You've got questions.
Yeah, Tommy, I want to know that now that the vote is over, are you going to try another tactic now? In other words, why does your independence have to mean their independence, those other people who don't want it?
Yeah, well, good question. And the battle has already commenced. I mean, we've had all sorts of skullduggery tactics and whether or not vote rigging can be proved. Certainly the lies are there for all to see. And one of the key ones, and I mentioned this as far back as 6 months ago, and saying watch out in the last couple of weeks. And lo and behold, the last poll that came through, or one of the polls 2 weeks ago, put the yes ahead. And then what happened, and that was from a gap of 60-40 for the no, and so it had narrowed to the extent that yes were ahead just 2 weeks and Sunday ago. And then what happened, it was the campaign upped about several notches. But then there was this whole thing, and it was very ambiguous, and there was nothing concrete. But then it was all talk about Devo Max, because Scotland got its own parliament 17 years ago, and it was called devolution. So they got some control of its own power. But everything that gets put through its own parliament, it's what happens, it has to be okayed at the Westminster level. So it's not really, it's just basically a talking shop. So the ball was played by the no campaign to say, well, look, if you vote no, we will give you more powers. So they were calling it devolution maximus. So it was more powers, but not real powers. And one of the main powers was, well, we could raise our own taxes. And now the raising of the own taxes is key because there's tremendous austerity measures that are happening to services such as the NHS, where if you go into a hospital or anything happens, it's free at the point of use. But what they're trying to do is they're trying to get people to pay for it. So, and Scotland is different from England because this has been happening in England, and the whole battle was fought on, the control of the resources and control of particularly the health service. And so this was fought out, and the ex-politician Gordon Brown came in riding his white horse at the end, and he said, and he gave a rousing speech the day before it, and was all passionate about the union and staying together. But a week before it, he said, we'll set out a timetable where we give you more powers. And the 2 days before the election, he said, we'll give you this vow that this will happen. But then straight away...
With a vow that what will happen?
That they would give more powers to Scotland. But straight away, from the first day, that was reneged on. And then the political infighting started, where the Tories, the Conservative government, they have got only one MP. Now, the Labour has got about 40 odd. And now what that has done is placed them in a predicament. So the political game has begun. And then you've got on the yes side, Alex Salmond has thrown his hat in and saying, I'm resigning and taking a back seat. And he was a particularly divisive character. So
this was Alex Salmond was the guy who was like one of the heads of the secessionist movement, right?
Yes camp. Yeah, he's the first minister of Scotland. He's a leader of the SNP, of the majority government of the Secession, which is the devolution, which is separate to Westminster.
Mark,
so
you look
call
confused.
for this referendum.
I'm just trying to figure out all the characters here.
What are you confused about?
Well, what Alex had said.
Okay.
So Alex Salmond, the head of Scotland, he's separate from David Cameron, which is the head of Britain.
Right.
And so Alex Salmond's want to get more control. But what he did the day after it on the Friday, once they found out he'd lost, he resigned.
That's right.
Now, what's happening now, there's going to be an election, and Nicola Sturgeon, his deputy, will go in place. And then
I think we're getting a little bit too far down into the politics.
I'll round up. If you let me round it up very briefly, the popular movement, the grassroots movement, is now calling ourselves the 45 because 45% voted for yes. And this grassroots movement won't go away. The British elite has picked the wrong people to take a fight with. Now, Scotland's going to stand up. Many people are joining the SNP, and the SNP is going to... There's a Westminster election. Scottish National Party led by Alex Salmond. And then what is happening? There's elections for Westminster coming up this time, and then in a year's time, there's a year and a half time, there's elections for Holyrood. And then once that happens, if they do not keep up to their promise, then the Scottish people will force the issue for independence, I would reckon, within the next 2 to 5 years.
So just to clarify, what you're saying is they promised before the election, the people in the House of Parliament,
Westminster,
they promised, stick with us, we'll give you more power, we'll give you more independence. And you're saying that if they don't come through with that, you're saying this group, the 45, they're calling themselves the 45, that they will force this issue again within 5 years.
And what's the fastest they could force it?
Well, it all depends on the government. There's the Westminster election, so what could happen? It depends on what government it happens, and that's what's happening. They're taking angles now down in London. The Labour and the Conservative, they're the two factions, and they're all taking political positions because they know that what will happen will lead to one of them being in power in just another 7 months' time. And then in Scotland, so what's going to happen in Scotland in a year and a half's time, we have our own national elections, and the Scottish people will put in power again the SNP, and then once again they'll have a mandate to say the Scottish people now want a referendum, and then they'll be able to fight it again and take it on board.
So this isn't over yet. It could do a lot better next time, sounds like.
Power to the people, and free Scotland. We're not giving up, and we're taking it all the way, because, as I say, the British Empire is a crumbling. It's been crumbling for 100 years, and we're about to deliver the fatal blow, because once this blow is destroyed, the Union must be destroyed. Free Talk Live and Free Scotland, and God bless, brothers.
Thanks, brother. I appreciate the call tonight. Thank you, Tommy in Glasgow.
Free Talk Live, 7 nights a week from 7 to 10 Eastern, live on the Liberty Radio Network at LRN.FM.